Welcome to the Teaching Excellence podcast. I am today joined by Joanne Miles. Welcome, Joanne.
Lovely to be with you, Steph.
How are you?
Not too bad, enjoying the sunshine today, thank God.
I know you have. Actually, it's got sunnier as we've been chatting, because we've been just chatting before we started, didn't we?
Exactly.
It's got sunnier, it's glorious today, so we're grateful for that.
We are.
So we thought we'd catch up. We recorded a podcast a little while ago, and we decided we would just catch up, see how things are going, see what's going on out there in the world of teaching and learning FE and the madness that is, and lots have happened. So what have you been up to? How have you been?
Been doing a lot of work with teachers on virtual teach meets, so it's just been utterly fascinating to see the incredible range of models that are coming to the fore in schools and colleges for this year. And it's just struck me that we're in, I mean, people keep saying uncharted territory, but actually we're kind of creating new ways of working with students. So some places have said to me, we're going initially face-to-face because our buildings are big enough, our staff can be in, we're going to try and do induction and the first at least few weeks of term in our building. So that's quite exciting for them. They're feeling like that return to normal practice, if you like. Other places have opted for the first 6 weeks to be entirely online. Some places have said, actually, we're going to go blended from the beginning because we feel like that's a more realistic model for this year. So they're starting to think about what do we need to do and want to do in classroom versus what will sit really well and be useful and productive online. So there's this incredible complexity, and I just feel like for the leaders, for the teachers, for the learners, this is a level of challenge and unfamiliar territory that's quite mind-blowing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hearing similar in that no two models are the same.
No.
Almost, and there's lots of people doing, like you say, trying to get in as much as possible face to face.
Yes.
There's some who are, I haven't actually spoke to anyone who's doing the whole thing like 6 weeks online.
But
that's really interesting. We're going to come back to that sort of thing. But I have heard where people are splitting their groups because the classrooms and the buildings are not big enough. And I have heard of having the group split, so in college at the same time, but split between two classrooms and live streaming to one.
Right.
So, there was a whole debate about that, lots of thinking around, what does that feel like for the group that's being live streamed to?
Yes.
Was there a different way of doing it? As in, as a teacher, you'd be in one room to deliver and facilitate something, while in the other space, it would be some sort of, task that the students were working on, and then swap.
Right.
There was a whole debate around, the impacts of live streaming and what that meant but being there in person.
That's really interesting. I've heard of the one where you've divided the group in half. Mm-hmm. Half of the students are in college in the building doing the face-to-face session with the teacher. The other half are at home with the live streaming individually, which I think in a way is even worse than what you just suggested, because they haven't got that connected feeling. They're literally isolated in their own box. And then they're at the whim of how good the teacher is at engaging two groups who are working entirely differently. So in a way, I can see that potentially having them in two rooms at least means you could, if you were well planned and the rooms were near each other, you could bob between. Yes. But for me, that the potential workload pressure and challenge for the teacher, if the two rooms are not doing the same thing, is really, really difficult, I think.
Yeah, that it got me thinking about how we develop sort of independent learning skills.
Yes.
And that really means, because we both know that sometimes people think that means send your students off to do something and then tell them to come back, and often the scaffolding of that learning has not been very good.
Exactly.
The instructions, the innovation or the creativity around what they've been asked to do can be really poor.
Yeah.
And it's never actually okay to call that independent learning.
Yeah.
But there are ways of doing that different blocking. Again, and we always say this, is you know, if you think pedagogy first,
Yes.
you think about evidence-based teaching,
Yes.
where collaborative learning, and that doesn't mean they have to be sat close together.
No.
You know, but collaborative learning and reflection, metacognition, and
Yes.
embedding formative assessment into, you know, teaching learning tasks or teaching learning design, you're hopefully going to get some good learning out of that. But yeah, all these different varieties of
Absolutely
doing things is mind-blowing, and there isn't a right answer, is there?
No, because I think if we're really honest at the moment, we don't know what this is going to look like yet, right? What we're doing is we're grappling with concepts around what blended learning might look like, which is partly classroom, partly using technology for more independent work. We're looking at the difference between face-to-face classroom with emergency remote teaching, where we have to suddenly depart because of lockdown to online work, which is maybe 100% online. Those worlds are different. And if you look at what people are saying in research and in practice, there are some different principles, some different ways of operating. So for example, in the online space, there's some issues around the design of the materials. And I think you're really right to point out the clarity to help learners work independently. So in terms of online design, I'm reading about principles of making sure the tasks are scaffolded with very, very clear instructions, but that they're chunked down into really small pieces. So maybe a video clip for learners to watch with 2 or 3 questions embedded, but the clip might be 5 minutes. There might then be a second clip with another 2 questions in it. So you're allowing people to focus without the strain that we get from extended exposure to the screen. And you're following good learning principles and pedagogy that sits underneath about engaging with content and making an active response, which we know they need to be doing in all the online work in order to engage effectively. So for me, there's a lot of complexity about the design, but about trying to make sure we embed the principles underneath any of these models that we're trying to devise.
Yes,
I think we're actually devising it.
I agree, and there's so much to think about. Some of the conversation I've been having, it feels like it snowballs very quickly.
Yes.
And it is very complicated. There's lots, like you say, this is brand new.
Yes.
People are finding their ways
yes.
of doing things. And although there's lots of examples out there of remote delivery,
yes,
in different places, it isn't exactly the same.
No.
That at the minute we're toying with the different approaches.
Exactly.
Sometimes in, sometimes not in, sometimes some of them are in, and there's not.
Yes.
And this streaming thing, and there's lots going on. And I do think, and you and I are similar in that way, that we always look out at what exists and what the research says and what people are writing about to help us to think.
Yes.
Not necessarily do exactly what someone else is doing, but allow us to think and apply what is going on. But yeah, I mean, there isn't a right or wrong answer, but I am kind of pushing the message in different places about pedagogy first.
Me too, all over the place. Because if we don't come from the learning principles, whatever we devise is not going to have the impact for learning that we desire. So for me, I've been saying to teachers, don't go down the digital rabbit hole of thinking learning 20 tech tools is going to make your learning program effective in this new world. Be focused on, do my learning principles of looking at prior knowledge, of giving input in ways that are engaging, of providing practice opportunities, assessment and feedback, creating that as a skeleton underneath whatever you do is going to create a great learning opportunity for students. Then it's putting the tech in to fit those different purposes at different points in the process. So for me, there is this danger at the moment of being dragged too much towards the technology and losing the heart of the profession that we have and the practitioner skills that we have. So for me, for people, it's important to reassure and almost say, go from what you know about teaching and learning first, and then acquire the skills for the tech gradually, put the tools in to suit that purpose, but don't lose your focus on the purpose.
Yeah, and it is that for me, one piece of advice I'd given a little while ago, and I think I still stick to it, is, choose sort of 5 things.
Yeah.
From a pedagogy point of view.
Yeah, that you need.
And then use that as your scaffold, like you say, your skeleton of how you design, whether it's in person or whether it's online.
Absolutely.
Use that to design what you're doing. and then that will allow you to then choose tools that will fit
Exactly.
those principles.
Exactly, because you need that. You need the prior knowledge and how you're going to give it. Are you going to give a presentation in PowerPoint with voiceover narration? Because that's actually quite a useful tool. You can also have the caption showing there, which I'm hearing teachers are using a lot. Are you going to use a video clip? Teachers have said to me recently, Edpuzzle and H5P are two tools where you can place a video clip with the questions embedded for the students. You can then see on the data of it which bits learners have repeated and reviewed again and again to see where there might be potential problems, where they might have got stuck. So you can create content with useful tools, but fitted to your pedagogical purpose, which might be sharing content with students.
Yeah.
So I think you're right. We've got to think about the tools and have a small, manageable toolkit, some quizzes, some ways of using maybe thinking about Nearpod and Socrative as two quizzing tools that allow you to do self-assessment, some work on peer assessment, some formative assessment work in a session. All of that would be very useful, but you don't need 10 tools for doing quizzes.
No, and I am that person that always, if it feels too hard to figure out a piece of tech quickly,
yes,
I'll go back to my pedagogical principles and we'll do a reflective plenary that doesn't include technology, but really allows students to meaningfully reflect on their learning.
I love that.
So much more out of that than me spending 3 hours trying to figure out the tech.
Totally.
But it's those things that we can use easily, but are meaningful rather than
absolutely
applying the tech for the tech's sake, isn't it?
Absolutely agree with you. And at the moment, with the workload and the pressure, I feel like teachers, it's so important that we're all really cautious about the amount we're putting on ourselves as pressure. It's going to be a hard, long, very flexible, changeable year where we're going to need to adapt a lot. It's going to not be all in the classroom. It's going to be some lockdowns, some local problems. We can see this emerging already, even though we're not in the autumn yet. So I think we've got to be future-proofing ourselves against that level of strain by not overloading our prep with innovating across every aspect of our practice with technology right now. It's almost think, actually, do I need to learn one more quiz tool? Do I want to give learners feedback? Maybe an audio file could be quite an interesting way of giving feedback. Some people have said they found, particularly with younger learners, that's really engaging. Learners like to hear the teacher talking in their own style, pitched at the right level to the individual. So people have been, instead of typing everything, doing short audio file feedback. That, if that's of relevance for you, that could be worth exploring.
You've just got me thinking, actually, because it's the day and age of social media. So Instagram stories where talk to the camera, that is normal, and you're used to seeing people talk to a camera.
Exactly.
And so for teachers, it's just a case of maybe getting brave of doing quick feedback videos that are, I'd say, less than 3 minutes.
Absolutely.
Maximum.
Oh, yes.
To give constant and frequent feedback to the students.
Absolutely.
There's tools like Flipgrid, which is short video type. There's really innovative ways of doing lots of really useful feedback that's not people taking reams of marking home,
completely
downloading lots of files that submitted, and typing feedback on all of them.
Absolutely.
That's going to be harder to move away from. Because people are tied to formative feedback being written feedback on work.
Yes.
And that feels scary for people to move away from that. But you don't have to go from 100 miles an hour to the other. There is a way of moving that, but all the time's got to be about reducing workload if possible for staff.
Completely.
Or making things more efficient.
Absolutely. Two things I've heard from schools, because schools have been looking at trying to reduce marking for some time, and there's been lots of research studies going on around that. Education Endowment Foundation, for example, have done some work around it. So two things I've heard from teachers: people thinking about looking at the programme of learning and thinking, where is it that I really have to give the written feedback? Looking at the scheme of work and going, actually, here and here, it has to be written for individuals because of the qualification, because of the assessment, because of anything that means that you really need to give the written feedback at that point. At other points in the programme, people have been saying, I've been giving group feedback of key points, maybe recorded on a PowerPoint with voiceover, or as maybe like a Loom clip where you can just do a talking head. using Loom, which is a free Google Chrome extension that you can just put on your bar toolbar. So you can record yourself speaking with your face showing, or you can record slides with your face invisible if you prefer not to be a video star. But that means you could give key messages to the group that are group-based feedback, which in research is showing to be powerful for people.
The evidence is there that is powerful.
It is powerful. And so blending those approaches in your scheme of work. So maybe there's some Loom recording that's group feedback. There's some individual sound recording. It could be Loom, it could be Vocaroo, it could be another tool I don't even know the name of yet, Flipgrid, maybe. And then at some points it's the written marking. So I think we also need to, in our planning, think about our own capacity and our sustainable approaches in what will definitely be, however way we cut it, a very challenging year for workload, I think. I think there's no two ways around that one.
I like that. And we often don't sit and write our scheme of learning or scheme of work with us in mind.
I agree with that. Yes.
I'm kind of realising this now. I've never really articulated it like this. But we think about the qualification, and we think about Ofsted, and we think the students, which is the students obviously need to come first.
Yes.
In terms of what they will get out of the learning. But, you know, there is that element of now the real space to be working together as a team, collaboratively with teachers to say, how do we now make this more efficient, more innovative?
Absolutely.
And help ourselves with
the tools
that we've got to make this really effective, but maybe save ourselves some time in trying different things. What I want to campaign about a little for just a second is what I want people to think about is how this, if you're going to add something in, what are you going to take out?
Yeah.
You can't keep adding in.
And does it merit the effort? I mean, your example, I mean, a teacher said to me recently, he said, I was playing with a quiz tool. I lost a whole morning for a quiz that took the learners 5 minutes.
Yeah.
He said, and I just suddenly thought, oh, I need to be careful. I can do that once, and now I know how to use that quiz, and I can use it again, and I won't have the prep time. But if I multiply that over 10 new tools, I've wasted a week of my time. Yeah?
And a little example yesterday was me. I was editing a YouTube video. And, you know, I'm still learning how to do all the different stuff and the social media stuff, especially recently things have changed and I'm doing a lot more thinking about social media on different platforms. I just needed to snip 4 seconds off the end of my YouTube video. And I couldn't figure out how to do it. At 7 o'clock on a Sunday morning, there's not many people to ask.
You would have got so don't care at that point, wouldn't you, from many friends, even quite good friends.
Yeah, exactly. And I did have a couple of suggestions, but then I found, you know, the Windows Photo app allows me to do it very easily, but it took me about 1 hour and 15. In the future, that will take me literally 2 minutes.
That's right. But it's still going to be worth that effort, hasn't it? It really has to.
For me, that will be really worth it because how much video recording, podcasting and stuff that I'll be doing.
That's right.
But for teachers, it's always got to be the balance between payoff and time investment.
Absolutely.
But it gets me thinking again about how the power of community and unity and working together is really important because of it means that everyone else is not having to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah.
Time, if we possibly can share any little golden nuggets of knowledge.
Never been more important. I mean, I just feel like this year, what we need in all institutions is we need really strong, structured opportunities to be talking and sharing. We need online areas, discussion boards, Padlets, whatever you want to do, where people can store ideas and approaches or useful resources and links. We need the discussion spaces that are safe, where people can talk in their teams frequently about what's working, what's difficult, what they can't understand, any concerns they've got, what they found that might be a magically useful tool that's really worked with their level ones. We need that sharing to be really systematic, consistent. We need it to be informal and formal. So we also need, I think, leaders to really, really step up and enable those spaces to happen. So that's about the leadership of creating the community.
Yeah, I was on my high horse yesterday, just me and myself, you know, just having a conversation about I was doing real thinking about professional development.
Yeah.
I recorded a podcast yesterday, and it was about the space to reflect and the power of communities of practice ultimately.
Yes.
And I thought to myself, if managers did nothing other than create small spaces with meaningful questions and building, then the amount of support, the reduction of fear, the willingness to try new things would be, it's exactly what's needed and would be really powerful this year, in particular to look at the power of building the space to really reflect on practice
completely
as professional development. That's not another thing. That's not
integral. No. It's actually, are we thinking, what are we noticing? I keep saying to teachers and teach me, what have you noticed? And they say things like, oh, it's interesting how sometimes now I'm noticing some of the younger girls in my young cohorts are more verbal than they are in the classroom when we're working on the technology. And it's only when I stop and think about that I notice it, and that it's interesting, and I can reflect further and see what I do with that. So the stopping and pausing through, like you said, short conversations with really well-focused, thought-provoking questions are going to be so important this year and so invaluable.
So, and the power of the diverse thinking around the table, whether it's a table or online, it doesn't really matter.
No, both I think would be great for people.
I think if anybody is going to, with professional development, is going to move to a place that's super useful, it's more the space just to reflect, to think, to discuss, to debate.
Yes.
In a very positive way. So yeah, I think that's really important this year. And I think, just learning from each other is going to be, well, it is happening. There's lots going on.
It is happening. No, it is, I think. People are. But we need it to be embedded as a way of working as we try to work out what this new set of approaches and practices could look like. I mean, I think one of the important points there is this feeling of a safe space where you can say, I can't get this working with my level ones, right? Or like teachers who said to me in the summer, if I'm honest, I've lost some learners. They've vanished. They're missing in combat with COVID. They're not engaging in online. They're not submitting. I'm honestly saying to you, I think I've lost them. So we need the spaces to be safe enough and for people to feel vulnerable enough to be able to say those things and express that vulnerability and things that they might be worried about saying, in a more performance-y kind of context. But we need that to come out, because otherwise we're never going to work out together how we can tackle the complexity here. We need all brains on it, right? I think all brains on it, talking all year.
Yeah, and saying that, you've just reminded me of a conversation I had last week, which was, when you say all brains on it, that includes the students.
Of course. Oh God, yeah.
And it includes the, working with the students to design the learning and where it evolves to, because we don't have all the answers.
No.
The students will give different points of view. Some we might take on, some we might not.
Yeah.
But it's really important that we get that constant feedback.
Yes.
To use to influence what we do and how we do it.
Absolutely. Some people said to me they've tried putting questions at different points in their session and getting students just put answers in the chat box. They've tried short roundtable discussions happening with people. They've posted surveys into Microsoft Teams or Google Classroom, but they're doing it really frequently, just about maybe a few points that are emerging. So the thing about how do people feel about the cameras on, cameras off in live session, really interesting to see learners' views on how that's affecting their experience in live sessions. The issue of work being posted in Microsoft Teams or Google Classroom and the feedback loop, how are we doing it? Is it written? Is it verbal? Is it group content that's being discussed together in a live session? How is that process working for the immediacy of learners feeling our response to their work? I think we need to be asking questions all the time this year through different channels to gather the learner view, because together we're creating the new way of learning, I think.
Just going to write 2 key words down so don't forget later. This is the time for reflection and the time for community. And that's community with your students, because we said we might talk about induction
Yeah.
and relationships.
Uh-huh.
People being worried about building that, but it's also about the sense of community within our teaching teams, so that we're sharing and reflecting.
Yes.
So let's go to induction.
Yes.
What have people been talking to you about?
Gosh, definite anxiety for people who know they're going to be doing induction with new students in an online space, and places where they're going to be doing significant amounts of online learning in these early stages of the year. Obviously, those teachers are even more concerned because they're worried about the independent skills. So people have said to me, how do I form the relationship, the connection, the personal link when I'm not going to be face to face maybe with these learners either at all or to a very low extent. So we've been talking about things like the teacher sharing short video clips of a talking head of them talking about themselves, the course, the experience of working at the college, what it's like to be on the program with the student. Forming groups where the learners can meet together with the teacher, maybe in clusters, smaller clusters initially, where it's a kind of meet and greet session done live, but it's a real chat about how are you coping in COVID, what's it like at home, what have you watched recently on Netflix. It's kind of human connection that you would have in a classroom as chit chat, like the useful chit chats that we have as we walk around the room, as people are coming in, at coffee machine in the corridor, that we don't have if we're working virtually. So trying to replicate some of those effects and accelerate the feeling of connection, but using the technology in different ways. But it's definitely a concern for people. The final thing that I've heard from people is making sure when learners are starting to work with you together, that you keep repairing them in breakout sessions or Microsoft Teams channels, so they get to know each other, working together in the live sessions, and also in the collaborative group tasks, that you form different clusters so they start to go, oh, I know him and I've met her, and now I form a bit of a connection. So it's almost being much more conscious about how you combine people to create the stimulus to form relationships.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And there's a few things that have cropped up over lockdown about people may or may not have seen Lou and I doing the ideas room.
Yes.
You know, it kind of came about by an accident, but it always had the intention of connecting people.
Yes.
So I would say one of the most powerful parts of that is the how are you question.
Yes.
At the beginning, and making sure it's not just how are you and wait for people to respond. Everybody has a turn answering the question, how are you? And they're given the space to express how they feel. And as soon as they know that just for 20 or 30 seconds, you can choose what you want to say, you know, and you're heard by other people, it very quickly builds the sense of community, because I'm sharing how I feel as a human.
Yes, at the moment, absolutely.
And you start to get to know each other on a deeper level rather than just on a surface level.
Yes.
I think that for me in induction, my main thinking has been around how do you create this sense of community. It has to be about getting to know each other.
Yes.
But not getting to know your learning style.
No.
And getting, it's not that.
Yes.
It's getting to know you as a person. What's
Humans.
your motivations? How are you feeling? What are you interested in? And this is the time where we can encourage students to share how they feel. And know that we're all in a situation that can feel uncertain and unsure together.
And we're all going up and down in mood, in motivation, in energy. And that's actually a completely normal reaction to this. If you look at what psychologists are saying about how you react in this kind of situation, you can feel quite positive and quite on top of it and quite like, I've got a routine. And then other days you can feel like, I can't bear it, that I don't have my normal life. When will this be over? You can feel quite depressed. You can feel flat. Lots of people talk to me at the moment about feeling very flat with things, which is interesting. People who normally I find are very dynamic and positive and energized are saying I'm just like a flat line because there's not enough stimulus to make me feel my normal energy. So having that conversation regularly with students means we're connecting more as whole people. So actually some teachers did say to me their starter activity was always something with a personal focus. And that was sharing different elements of their life so people got to know more about the human who's in the group, which I think is a really, really good point.
That, you know, we've said it for a long time, you know, it's about holistic student development.
Yeah.
Education is not about Ofsted, it's not about ticking a box, it's about developing a whole person, whether they're 17 or 67, you know what, it doesn't matter. It's about developing people. And now is the time where, if we think about community and connection and the purpose of education, now is the time to just at least try to do things differently.
Exactly.
Very efficient and effective, but have real impact on human.
Absolutely. I remember when I used to teach ESOL and EFL, so we used to do a lot of getting to know you activities at the beginning of courses, and we'd set a couple of questions, and then we'd pair learners up, and they'd have to ask the questions and talk to their partner, and then report back to present their partner to the group. And it was a really interesting way of making sure people felt that accountability for sharing information, and then they were able to do that without feeling that thing of, I don't want to talk about me, but instead they were saying, this is what my partner has told me. So I think getting to know you styles, starter activities, and maybe plenaries, maybe thinking about your session and thinking, at the beginning of the day, we're talking about what's been going on. And then at the end, we're talking about, actually, what are you going off to do? Are you going off to work? Who's going off to do something with the family? Is anybody doing sport? You know, what are people watching tonight? You know, that kind of segue into what's your life going to be like after the session is also nice to go, actually, we're in this together, but we've got the bigger life. And we need to talk about both those things.
Yeah, and you've just got me thinking actually about how potentially, and it would need a bit of thinking, but, you know, how do we have a more of a chat channel?
Yeah.
You know, so you might have different channels for different modules or different subjects. Yeah. But is there a space that's a chat channel for the group, yes, which is, you know, we create a structure, or we create a bit of encouragement around sharing more fun stuff, or
yes,
social, that's a bit more social,
yes,
rather than focused on the content and the qualification. And, you know, there will always be a bit of a kickback from young people about sharing too much in that space. Again, working with the students to explain that building a sense of community involves us getting to know things about each other's lives. What types of things would you be happy to share in this sort of chat space, so that we can all get to know each other on a deeper level than just turning up in, whether it be online or in the classroom, and it being beyond, you know, just the content. There's something in there about, I think, sharing and structuring this, thinking about what experiences might you want to experience in your life.
Yeah.
There's something there about, I do a bit of reading around like visioning and about, you know, life goals and how you set that sort of thing. You know, that gives you a real insight into me, if I shared them with you.
Exactly.
And actually, wouldn't it be quite a nice space to help students to start that way of thinking, because they've often not been taught or nurtured to think really big for themselves.
Yes.
So maybe there's a bit of work there to do in that sort of chat space that allows them to reflect about what types of experiences they might want in their life. And
so it could be a blend of that, couldn't it? It could be the reflecting and the visioning forward. So kind of helping people think outside the box that we're trapped in at the moment, or the room that we're all trapped in at the moment. So starting to think about how the learning experience has been, what's happening in their lives that they want to dwell on, where do they want to take things. And I think you're right. We could that needs to be in a more personal type of space. Some people have said to me they're using WhatsApp groups, and they're finding that some learners are really, really responding well. Some people are even doing video calls and phone calls in that group, or just using it as a message stream. And they're saying that tends to be more informal and more personalised. But it's also a place where learners are then going, actually, could I have a chat about this? And then they're organising a more formal interaction that might be through Google or through Microsoft Teams. So it's a channel where people can reach out to each other in different ways, which I think is a great thing to be thinking about, because we're going to need lots of different ways of communicating to see which ones stick with different learners, I think.
And there's not any nuggets for me to share, but there's a book called Together. And it's all about community and the sense of why people either feel isolated or lonely or connected.
Yes.
And I can't remember the guy's name that's written it. I've got it on audio book, but really interesting to help us understand why actually loneliness is one of the biggest issues with people. When we're surrounded by people, we don't feel connected.
That's right.
I haven't listened to all of it actually, but it's really interesting, and it's very useful to think about some of the things, the research he talks about, and how that could possibly apply to building a better sense of connection and community in our classrooms.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, there's so much going on. I just want to remind people before we do sort of tie it all together about evidence-based teaching. We've mentioned a few things a few times, and if you look at the Education Endowment Foundation toolkit, the top 3 in there, I think they're still the same, are collaborative learning, formative assessment and feedback, metacognition and self-reflection, or self-regulation. And I think, if you go at it, whether you're in person, whether you're online, whatever that model looks like, with those things in mind. And I would also bring in the element of fun, creativity, interest. This is a real time to draw on what is going on in industry, and get people in, zooming in, create that sense of interest, intrigue, ambition. But, I don't want people to forget about collaborative learning, because there's so many ways of doing that, even whether, remotely. Not to get the students working together. But like you say, it gives them then, if you're conscious about how you put them together, they will get to know each other.
So you get the benefit of that connectivity and the starting to get the sense of the community in the group. That's triggered me thinking about some teachers who said to me, they've realised they're doing in-class, face-to-face work in the next couple of weeks, and they said, but we've realised we need to model with the learners how they will collaborate using the technology later. And we need to model that with the tech in the classroom, because those skills we will need when they're working independently without us, when we have lockdowns, when there's an outbreak and we have to send a cohort home, because we need to prepare them to be more familiar with the technology and more able to use it skillfully in an independent way. So lots of people have said to me, induction is going to be partly about forming the group identity and connection, which is so important. Also practicing some of the tech skills on whichever learning platform you're using with them, and getting them used to thinking about organising their life at home for study, how they would structure their day, how they will take notes, how they will research, how they will manage the strain of the screen, because I think we're all starting to hit the saturation point of wanting to throw the computer literally out the window on some days, literally, can't bear the thing, step away now. Learners will be experiencing that. So I think that using induction for all of those purposes will be helpful in building the community and the learning skills that they're going to need going through this year.
Fab. Well, we could talk all day.
We could.
So we'll bring it together there. But where can people find you if they want to find you?
Okay, on Twitter at Joanne Miles 2, so the number 2. And then I've got a WordPress website that's Joanne Miles Consulting on WordPress. If they put WordPress into Google and then Joanne Miles Consulting, they will find me. So I do lots of work with schools and colleges. I do training for teachers. I do work with leaders. I do lots of work on coaching, but also looking at quality improvement for teaching and learning. So people can find me and have a look at my work on the website.
Fab. Thank you so much, Joanne.
Great. Lovely to see you, Steph.
Yeah, same. And I'll see you soon.
Great. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.